Everybody, and welcome to the fourth webinar in the 2013 Pan Pacific Safe Community Network webinar series. Today we are focusing on sun safety, and we have three fantastic presenters for you. We have Bama, who is a Senior Advisor for Sun Safety and Health Promotion Agency, and she is joined by Kat. We have John Greenwood from Weird Shade Limited in Australia, and we have Kerry, the SunSmart Advisor of the Cancer Society of New Zealand in the Central Districts. Just some housekeeping today. If you have a question that you would like to ask the presenters, you can either type the question in the box on your control panel, or you can raise your hand by clicking the orange button on the control panel, and at the appropriate time, Alan will unmute you so you can ask your question.
Tool that allows school communities to make sure that their outdoor play areas are sun safe. It also provides authentic learning experiences for students who can understand the risks of overexposure to UVR from the sun and participate in the making of the areas they play in sun safe. Using a Google Earth image of the school, the location of the activity is identified. Trees of varying shapes and sizes, school buildings, and shade structures are easily drawn. The activity is drawn noting the time of the day, duration of play, type of activity, and number of children, as these will be factors in determining the risk. Precise shade projections can be viewed for any time of the day, any day of the year, either as still images or as a movie. Seeing the progression of the shade during the day can be a powerful and useful demonstration for students and adults. The risk assessment function of the software provides schools with analysis and data regarding the activity under consideration. The risk profile shows the summer risk rating of the activity, and this can range from extreme to low. It also calculates how much extra shade is required to reduce the risk to low. The risk overview shows the risk rating of the activity for each hour of the day, indicating if the activity could be rescheduled to reduce the risk. Detailed shade statistics for each hour of the day are produced, showing the area of shade in square meters or square feet, what percentage of the activity is shaded, and the amount of shade per person. Such quantitative data can be essential to demonstrate compliance where regulations require the provision of shade. For at-risk activities, the software assists in finding ways to reduce the risk. Fixing your risk can be as simple as rescheduling the activity to a time of day when the UVR levels are lower or more shade is available. Another simple fix could be to move it to a well-shaded location in the school. The software analyzes the different options and advises the new risk rating. In some cases, it may be necessary to create more shade. Different combinations of trees and/or shade structures can be modeled and the risk of the activity checked. If necessary, the solution can be adjusted and rechecked until a low risk is achieved. Schools can check the risk of a single activity, or as many activities as they like, as often as they like. Check Your Risk is a planning and learning tool that offers significant benefits in creating sun-safe schools and students. It combines simple, clear graphics with instructive analysis to inform and empower school communities. It can be easily used by teachers, parents, and students to check the UVR exposure risk of an outdoor activity, explore options to reduce that risk, and recheck the risk until it is reduced. For more information, visit www.webshade.com.au.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction video that you played for us, John. While Bama sorts out her technical issues with her laptop, we're going to move on to our second presenter, John Greenwood from WebShade Australia. So now over
Hello.
to you, John.
Thank you, Tanya, and welcome everybody. It's nice to be with you. I don't think I'm on screen yet. If I can just see how to show my screen, I'll be right with you.
I don't know why it's not.
Okay,
Hello, Alan, can you hear me? Oh,
yep.
Yeah, hi.
That's all right.
Hi, Barma. We're just moving on to John's presentation, and then we'll come back to you if that's okay.
Okay, look, I think a key thing in this issue of making outdoor spaces safer is to look at the complementary need for health promotion strategies that support each other. There's a lot of work been done over a long time with regard to awareness and behaviour change, but we need to supplement that with supportive environments to make sure that we actually have a situation where people have safer outdoor environments that support the healthcare messages. We know that most skin damage occurs during childhood and that we can do a lot to protect children from skin cancer by providing shade, and we know that shade provides very high levels of protection. It's important that we actually provide effective shade, and the shade that we're looking to do needs to land in the right place at the right time of day and year. It needs to provide at least 94% protection from direct sunlight against indirect ultraviolet radiation, which can be quite an important aspect. It also needs to provide spaces that are comfortable in summer and in winter, because if they're not, people won't use the spaces. So they're the four key components we're looking at when we're looking at shade. I think the thing is that local government is uniquely placed in this issue because on the one hand, they're managers of public open space and they can control what happens in public facilities under their management. But they're also consent authorities, so they're in the position to influence what happens in private developments by way of their consent role. And so that many private outdoor spaces can be better planned with regard to provision of protective spaces with the involvement and support of local government. And there's no other agency that really has this unique role. And given that, I think it's an important position that local government recognises and utilises. The key to getting the shade right really is firstly in planning shade, making sure we understand where the shade really needs to be and to make sure we get it there. The other thing is to make sure we design shade that gives us appropriate shade solutions. We need to look at the system of shade, whether it's natural or built, or a combination of both. We need to get materials with the correct level of UV protection, and this is often a mistake that we see. And we also need to consider the height and the orientation and the general arrangement of the shade structures or trees in order to get the outcome that we want. And this generally has been quite a hard process. It's certainly one that communities have struggled with. The shade audit is the process that we recommend for developing a plan to properly analyse these aspects and coming up with the right solutions. The audit straddles both those strategies because it doesn't only look at the environment, it looks at the activities that happen within that environment and make sure that it brings together the activities that need protection with the actual correct means of protection. The audit is basically a planning tool that allows people to create safer outdoor environments, but it's also a regulatory tool because consent authorities, by requiring a shade audit to be done, can ensure that the proper consideration is given to these issues. So it's a powerful tool with two capabilities. Until now, it's really been an expert only that can do these sort of tasks, but what we've been trying to do at WebShade is to deliver tools to the community that enable these tasks to be properly managed by community rather than only by experts. Very briefly, there are 4 different stages of the shade audit, or the shade assessment. It's necessary to visit the site and carry out site field work, including understanding how the site is used as well as measuring and observing the site, drawing in the site and putting the data entry into the computer, the process then of following through on shade and risk assessment, and then finally the recommendations and findings. So there are 4 quite distinct stages, and it's a bit of a process, but the idea with the software is that it makes that quite accessible to people that want to do it. The essence really of WebShade is changing the way we do this process. till now we think it's been too difficult even to get shade landing in the right place. So what web shade allows people to do is to project the shade accurately at any time of day or year, to look at the statistical data that on the amount of shade they get. It actually looks at profiling the risk of the actual activities, and you saw that in that movie. The little thing about that movie really, although it talks at schools, the process of that movie is the fundamental process of the shade risk assessment tool, no matter which format it's in. And so it's a tool that applies equally well to councils or to schools or to childcare centres or a range of settings. We can see the risk overview throughout the day of the different activities, and these aren't theoretical risks, they're the actual risk of that activity in that exact location. The software allows people to model shade proposals and make sure they get the right outcome, and also to maximise the return on the investment they're making by getting the right amount of shade or the optimum amount of shade. I wanted to show just two very simple examples of how the tool has been used. In November 2012, we did an assessment of Ottawa Beach on North Island. And it's a pretty typical looking beach with some trees, lots of grass area, some play equipment and some seats. And what we found was that council were in the process of reworking the beach to remove a series of quite large pine trees. And there were good reasons for that, but we did look at the impact of that removal so that council could make an informed decision. And just without going through all these figures, you can see quickly that with the trees, the back of beach area received above 20% of shade throughout the day. Without the shade, without the trees, there was very little shade. It dropped on average from 23% to 5%. And similarly, the play equipment there with trees had quite a lot of shade during the day and almost none without the trees. So we're able to analyse in a great degree of accuracy the impact of various decisions that are being made. The beach itself, we split into two parts because it was quite a large beach. The North Beach area, the pink pink spaces on here are the activities. So we identified a range of activities: the back of beach, the play equipment, the south play equipment, basketball court, volleyball court, and an open grass area. And the software develops a risk overview of those activities throughout the day. And so you see the volleyball court and the play equipment were very high risk in the middle of the day and high through most of the day, whereas the open grass area and the back of beach were low throughout the day. Our findings were that basically the play structures were poorly shaded, that a lot of seats were exposed to direct UV, and generally the shade wasn't well utilised, with high risks between 10 and 4. We also were able to show that removing the pine trees would substantially decrease the shade, and that shade could be improved in other areas. We recommended that we retain the pine trees if possible, and if not, they be replaced with fast-growing trees. That we put shade structures over the play equipment and some more tree planting, and reconsider the location of the benches. With that as implemented, we've got a completely different risk profile. You can see in the diagram over on the right here that we've got the blue shade structures over the two areas of play equipment. You can see a lot more tree planting beside the volleyball and basketball courts. And the profile substantially changes. The play equipment is much better throughout the day. The basketball court in the afternoons particularly is better, and to some extent in the morning, and the play equipment south is again much better throughout the day. So we can not only recommend changes, we can demonstrate the impact those changes will have. I'd like to close by just showing a very simple example in a much reduced way of how councils particularly can make sure they're optimising their investment when they're buying shade. In this example, we've got a pink area, which is a playground area. You can see in pink line below there, or red line, there are various bits of play equipment. The blue structure on top is the shade structure. All we did here was to keep exactly the same shade structure had been built and see if by rotating it we could increase the amount of shade. So there's no greater investment here from council other than better designing exactly the same and better orienting exactly the same structure. And the difference is quite dramatic. And with the existing, we increased by more than 20 square metres of shade between 10 and 11 o'clock, more than that, 27 at 1 o'clock, and less at 3. So overall, we're able to increase by 20% the shade output of the same structure. And it seems to me this is a very simple example of how technology can be used to make sure we're getting the right decisions made and then getting the best outcome we can from our shade expenditure. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, John, for that fantastic presentation. Just a couple of questions. Firstly, how would we access the shade sale? How would local councils or schools or early childhood access this sort of technology, and is there what would the cost involved be, etc.?
Well, the technology is an online download, and it's delivered on a subscription basis. The cost of the subscription varies depending on the different sort of technology. There are about 5 different products we can offer. The Check Your Risk, which was the little movie you saw before, is at $200 per annum. We're talking Australian dollars, but it's a modest cost, and if schools or users find they don't need it for the following years, they don't need to resubscribe, and the subscription cost decreases in subsequent years. The other products really depend on the different usage and how we structure it, and we're still, frankly, working on our cost structure to make sure we minimise our costs by making sure that it's a viable business.
Thank you, John. I think that answers. The other question we've got, I think most of the Safe Community coordinators or coalitions are very familiar with SIPTED and SIPTED guidelines. Do you see the sunshade as being complementary, something that maybe planners and council should use when they're looking at public spaces that should sit alongside? And would it be in the planning or the Parks Department that you would advocate that the Safe Community Coalition sort of push that shade assessments be done?
Well, I think it's both. I think the planning council really needs to adopt policy that requires their own departments to implement these ideas, and so I think and the public to implement them as well when they're making applications. So I think it starts at the top with an overall solar protection policy, but certainly council would then need to implement that policy in their own parks and their own facilities generally. The ideal, of course, is that we're not retrofitting shade, that shade is planned in from the outset. If there's good shade at a park from existing trees, then play equipment and other things should be located where the shade already is. The idea isn't to build a whole lot more shade unless we really have to. The idea is to optimise the shade that already exists by good planning, and then where necessary to supplement that either with planting or with use of shade structures of various kinds. I'm not necessarily suggesting shade fabric solutions are appropriate everywhere. It's a matter of looking at what's most appropriate in the situation you've got.
Well, thank you very much, John. If anyone wants any further information from John, his details are on the web, on the computer screen there, and as a person who's used Overy Beach, I was very familiar with your presentation. Now we're going to go on to who's become our second presenter of the day, Kerry. So I shall hand over to you, Kerry.
Thanks, Tanya. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be part of this. And John, thank you so much for your presentation. It's really heartening to see what's possible with councils really taking on board the need to address shade in our planning of our outdoor spaces. So for me, what I'm just going to go through quickly is just a little bit of what's been going on in Palmerston North. As far as up on your screen at the moment, you'll see a photo of our local outdoor pool. And as you can see, right around the embankment, there's no shade whatsoever. And this is what happens. The photo with lots of teenagers is basically what happens at our school swimming sports. Of all our secondary schools, at primary schools, no shade whatsoever, and they're usually there from 9 till 3. Right, so Balmer started with a little bit of information about why this is such a big deal. So I won't repeat that. I think the information now that keeps coming through is that we need to be addressing this issue of skin cancer. We also need to be looking at the fact that UV radiation causes over 90% of our skin cancers, We have the highest melanoma death rate in the world for our New Zealand men, and in our region alone, melanoma incidence is the 3rd highest cancer. That's probably not unusual for the rest of New Zealand too. I think usually melanoma is featuring fairly highly. But for me, it was about the stories that people would often, after their schools had swimming sports, I'd get the phone calls at the Cancer Society the next day with frustrated parents who'd often run the school. Schools were frustrated about the fact that they were using basically an unsafe environment with no shade. As you can see from this poor little girl, sunburn was often very common, and the level of dissatisfaction was pretty high as well. So for me it was like, well, what are we going to do with all this? We need to actually address the stories that keep coming through year after year and look at how can we work together to actually address this and make it a safer environment and a more enjoyable environment for everybody. What we were up against though was, as you can see, very little shade. We also had the school swimming sports were often held, as I said before, over peak UV radiation times. The council, when I went to make a submission about this to the council, they were also having to compete with about 100 other submissions as well, all demanding attention and often financial support as well. The Local Government Act, the Amendment Act that was passed to this, also seemed to shift the emphasis away from the social, cultural, economic and environmental community wellbeing, and that local government were having to look at more sort of cost effectiveness and financial prudence, and I needed to have a look at how could I present what the information I had within that framework. We had, as John talked before about the need for SunSmart policies, that was something that over the last few years I've been working with the council to actually do that. We've now got a SunSmart policy. It covers things like shade planning, it recognises the role that the council plays as an employer of outdoor workers, because that's important too. Consent authorities, so for anybody that's holding on to sunbeds and things like that, that was part of their responsibility. But it was also really, really important that that was a policy that wasn't just buried in a folder somewhere. It needed to be audited and it needed to be evaluated. And that was something my role has often been about, going back to the council each year and saying, well, how about we have a look at this? What's happening with this? And often having the support of the community behind me to do that. Council's role has been that they've aspired to be a city recognised as a great place to live and work and bring up a family, lots of recreational opportunities. So for me this was about enhancing that. There was also, it meant too that local government's core services, one of the things I found when I was reading the sort of framework of the City Council was there was a recognition of the avoidance of mitigation of natural hazards. So for me, that's actually very much about minimising the impact of solar UV radiation. So, could we actually make this vision of shade become a reality? It's really important that one of the things we're doing is actually looking at how can we increase the provision of shade in public areas. Photo on the left-hand side with lots of teenagers as a school swimming sports and how they resorted to doing something about the lack of shade. The photo on the right, when I went to the council, it was really important that I had examples of what had worked in other places as well. So, what did I do? Well, I went and started talking to the council, I talked to some of the council staff, I talked to the Lido staff, I talked to people in the community. So it was really important that we were starting to collect the information. So first of all was a survey of the people that use the pool. It was also important that we had the evidence to go with this and support this when I made the submission to the draft annual plan. The survey results, and here's another photo of the diving pool next to the 50-metre pool, and as you can see the shade basically lies along the top of the fence line, and that's all the shade there is. So we had 79,000 people using the pool between December and February. 94% wanted more shade. 73.9% rated it the available shade as poor or inadequate. And one of the things I was asking people was, what did they see as the highest priority? Because the pool complex also includes a toddler pool and a leisure pool as well. And the highest priority was the embankment area, which has no shade whatsoever. It's been important too that there's been a real shift in the emphasis on SunSmart behaviour. Like years when I first started in this role, it was very much about slip, slop, slap and wrap. It was very much an individual focus. But if we're going to address why skin cancer keeps occurring, we also, as John mentioned before, we need to be looking at our environments. So our Ottawa Charter, for me, gave me a framework and gave me a strategic process that I could link local government's responsibility to community health and well-being. And it was very clear that building healthy public policy meant that there was a SunSmart policy anchoring all this together. The environment's influence wasn't just about the physical environment, it was also addressing the need for the social environment, for improving people's knowledge, both for the community and for the staff. The community consultation meant that the survey mobilised the support from those affected by lack of shade. And there was also great collaboration going on between the Cancer Society, the council staff, the Lido staff, and the community, both in the survey design, the evaluation, and the discussion of the findings. Reorienting health services has been really interesting too, because the council also needed to recognise the role they could play in the health and well-being of their community and as employers of outdoor staff, but also too, I had a lot of support from our local health professionals at the DHB and local dermatologists who really wanted to see something that would happen that would be more about the prevention of skin cancer rather than the continuing line of people coming in for treatment. So key to success for me was about making sure that it was a collaborative approach, that I was working with the council rather than against them. It also was important that there was time for consultation during the submission process, and that people were being kept informed about what the benefits of this process was, and also about keeping people informed about the whole journey, about what was going on. During this process, it came to light very quickly where the people that were passionate about SunSmart were, and it meant for me that I had a chance to support local planning, the Parks and Reserves manager, and what he was trying to do. The evidence was definitely my job to do my homework, make sure that I had supporting evidence to go along with my submission. And make sure too, this is really always important, that policies are evaluated and councils are held accountable to those. It was interesting because involving the Lido aquatic staff, people have different perspectives as to what they're bringing to the table. So the realists around the table wanted to know, what was this going to look like in reality? How much was it going to cost? And we had to be really clear about what was it that we were actually trying to do. And also too, how people with different agendas could actually work together. Like, there's great potential here for business sponsorship and things like that. Whereas for me, it's very much about, let's improve the shade levels. So, smart recommendations to the council was shade placement for outdoor areas, the sun awareness campaign for the staff, and a safe work environment, which is something I can support the staff in, and increasing their level of knowledge, particularly about not only prevention but also early detection as well. And some examples about what's worked in other places, what can we look at, how can we learn, as John was showing before. It's really good to be able to learn from what other people around the country have already done. And as you can see, learning from others, often it's great seeing how other councils have addressed problems like this. So the last slide for me is that, yes, we do need to work together to invest in health through shade, education and a sun-safe environment. And by doing this, we'll go a long way towards addressing the huge burden that skin cancer causes in our country. I would just like to quickly also acknowledge John and Barma for the amazing work that they do in doing this. And also I'd like to acknowledge the amazing support that I've had from the City Council and from the Lido staff, and also my colleagues in the Cancer Society and University of Otago. So thank you very much, everybody. And let's see some great shade being developed.
Thank you very much, Kerry. That was a very informative and inspiring presentation from you. Just a couple of questions that sort of came into my head, and maybe some of the other people while you were speaking. Would you consider that what you did was sort of normal practice? Is this something that happens around the country with other SunSmart advisors? Would they be looking at public spaces?
Yes, they would very much like to. I think sometimes I've been really fortunate that I could see forming a relationship with particular people in the council was the way to go, and I think that's key. And I think often Cancer Society health promoters around the country are very willing to do the same.
Okay, and would you be happy for people to contact you for further information on this process and who are the best people and your experience?
Yes, no, I'd be very happy to do that.
Okay, thank you very much, Kerry. Now I think Barma is back on board, has sorted out her technical issues. So now we're going to hear from Barma, who's the Senior Advisor for Sun Safety with the Health Promotion Agency. So I'll hand over to you now, Barma.
Hi, thanks, Tanya, and sorry about that, guys. I knew my presentation wasn't quite as interesting as John's and Kerry's, but you know. Anyway, I'm going to keep this really short because I think a lot of the points that I was going to cover through my presentations have been really fantastically covered by both Kerry and John in their presentations. But I do know that quite a few of you are injury prevention, and I just thought I'd show you, we were talking about the burden of skin cancer, and I just thought I'd show you this slide which compares road deaths with skin cancer, deaths from both melanoma and non-melanoma skin cancer. So road deaths 2010, I think there were like 375 deaths. So compare that to melanoma, which is 324, plus another 100 deaths from non-melanoma. So just to give you a bit of a sense of the mortality from skin cancer when compared to road, where you do have quite a bit of investment and work happening. The other thing I wanted to tell you is Kerry has, spoken about the work that she's been doing with Palmerston North City Councils, and we we recently conducted a survey with the councils across New Zealand to try and assess the existing policies and practices they had in place and uptake of policies. And what we found was that there had been an improvement from 2004 when we had previously done this, but that the third bullet point that would says 20 councils have some protection policies in place, which was very promising for us. But what we also found was this was quite varied. So you had councils that really had significant policies covering a lot of areas, but there seemed to be more of a focus on outdoor workers, their own outdoor workers, so in parks. And so the councils did have more policies in place to protect their staff who worked outdoors. They had a mix of policies when it came to protection, when it came to events and other community-specific activities. And so one of the key focus for us this year has been to work with councils to improve sun safety for their workers, but also for their communities. And this is where the shade assessment tool that John has been talking about comes into effect. So I know that John has shown you the Oriwa example, and that was a huge step for us. And it took us about a year and a half to, and I'm sure all of you know the frustrations, for trying to get things done and moving. So it was, we met with, had to present to the board and go through the local government New Zealand zonal meetings before we actually had the opportunity to subsequently engage with Hibiscus Coast board, and which led to the Oriwa audit, shade assessment. But one of the best outcomes we have had from this assessment is that the recommendations from the assessment are being looked at and are likely to get implemented. And for us, that's a great case study, which we hope, and of course, Kerry has been talking about her work with Lido Pool, Palmerston North. And these are the kind of case studies that we are really keen to take across to other councils and engage with the councils and be able to help them in a really practical way in terms of, so they can assist councils to undertake shade assessments of the open areas. So what we've been trying to do is, from a practical point of view, what we've been trying to do is promote shade assessment training for councils. We are working with agencies such as Recreation New Zealand. We've been working with agencies such as Recreation New Zealand with their specific pools team, and they have outdoor worker. They have a team that looks at sporting and recreational environments. So we're working with them. They also have a parks team. So we're trying to work with really specific sector groups to try and provide training to council representatives. We're also trying to assist them with undertaking the shade assessments themselves. And that's where we'll be partnering with John and using Kerry's expertise, having worked with Palmerston North City Council. We do have other resources that we are, provide to councils even now for their events. And again, looking at developing easy-to-use templates so that councils can pick on these policies and templates and can look at existing policies that have been developed by other councils and use that to develop their own policies for both workplace and community. And actually, that was my presentation. I was going to keep it really short, and I've just, it's fantastic. I think Kerry and John were the two people that you had to listen to because they had done some really good work.